Hey, Bob, thanks for coming on. Bob is award-winning CPA, top producer, coach, author, podcast host, and public speaker, regularly acknowledged for disrupting his space. He's featured content on platforms such as Forbes, NBC, Breakfast Television, and much more. Bob, I appreciate you coming on. How you doing?
It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm doing pretty good. It's a little rainy outside today, so I could appreciate a little bit of sunshine, but over and above, really well.
Absolutely. I'm sorry to leave out some things in the introduction. There's just so much, and we only have a certain amount of time. So
It's all good. Well, I appreciate you acknowledging that there's more there, because that could mean a lot or a little, but we'll leave it to the audience's imagination. What maybe
absolutely.
we didn't talk about. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, just listening to you talk, you see the amount of value and the experience and everything you have. I mean, I met you for the first time at the multifamily conference this year. And I think we talked for maybe 15 minutes and I just left and I was like, the amount of value you gave in a 15 minutes talk is like, I have to have you on. So I really appreciate, again, I appreciate you coming on.
Well,
Um,
hopefully we can leave the audience feeling the same way, right?
Absolutely. So the one thing that we did talk about briefly that was the capital gains tax that was implemented this year, the changes in that. And is that something you could maybe briefly go over what it is and what has changed?
For sure. And I'll try and keep my political opinions outside of the facts. But I feel like anyone who's getting hit with any of these sort of proposed changes, and I say proposed because the legislation hasn't come through yet, although it's expected that it fully will. It's very frustrating, right? And
Mhm.
I believe that there's a lot of discussion around, less than 1% of people being impacted by this change, and that's simply untrue, which is unfortunate because there's so many individuals, and in real estate investors specifically, who maybe just have a few individual households that they're renting, single family units to, that have put everything they have into these real estates as a part of their sort of wealth accumulation plan, and these individuals are getting hit with this. So what it actually looks like is that the capital gains tax inclusion rate went from a 50% inclusion rate to a 66.7%. So one half to two-thirds inclusion rate. And, initially a lot of people are going, oh my goodness, we're paying 66.7% tax. No, we're not paying 66.7% tax, but 66.7% of the gain is being included, and we're paying tax on that at our marginal rate, which means that it's still a lower tax rate, but it's not as lower of a tax rate as we had prior to June 24th. So typically what that means, when accountants talk about marginal tax rates, right? Marginal tax rates meaning your tax rate, depending upon how much income you earn, goes from 0 all the way up to around 55%. And so when we talk about comparing apples to apples, we always use, the highest level rate. And so what that means is, prior to the change, a capital gains tax on a disposition on a gain would have been 25%. And now it's being pushed up to 33%. So it's about an 8% increase in tax overall with the new capital gains tax rate. And so there's a few things that we need to know about. There's some limited exemptions as individuals, so that if we're not claiming a significant amount of gains, so if we're at $100,000 of gains during the year, then we're okay. We're still at that 25% rate. And I believe it's at 300,000. Actually, I'm just going to confirm that. I believe it's at $300,000 that anything above that gets taxed at the 33% tax rate. So meaning that 8% more is hitting us. So very, very frustrating there for individuals. From a corporate, so if you have a corporation and your corporation owns real estate or investments of any sort, you sell it, there's no small threshold exemption. It's all going to be taxed at that 33% rate. Now, for people like me, we instantly go to, what does this mean overall? Does this change the strategy for business owners? Does this change the strategy for investors? And the answer is no. In fact, Kevin O'Leary just had a post out the other day, and I like Kevin. I've met Kevin. We've had multiple conversations. Good guy, heart in the right place. But he put a post out which I thought was a little bit irresponsible a few weeks ago, and he said that investors in the Canadian space need to exit now, and that's what the top accounting firms and advisors are telling people is to move your cash out of Canada and into another country. And it's simply bad advice and wrong. And I can assure you, based on the fact that we've done the calculations, that no advisor who is being responsible would ever offer that advice. And the reason being, we are, again, looking at a 25% tax up to a 33% tax. We don't like it. But if we depart and we pull all of our money out of Canada, we're paying all this tax up front because there's a departure tax. And when we pull it all out up front, we're then left with 75% of what we started with. So we're starting with a lower investment value. Whereas if we leave the money in and we don't want to accept it without kicking and screaming, but we accept the rate, we're going to pay that little bit more. If you keep that larger investment value before tax continuing to be invested, you're going to end up winning 10 out of 10. In fact, it's somewhat, can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but it's more like an 80% increase return on investment if you keep your funds inside Canada versus pulling them out. So it's a long-winded answer.
That's
But
fantastic.
I think the important thing is that we don't want to make any drastic decisions.
Absolutely.
In the past, I've had a lot of business owners when there's a tax change like this that comes in where they go, Bob, we're selling everything and we're moving down to Turks and Caicos. And I go, pump the brakes, guys. First off, let's get very clear on what the new rules are. And then let's talk about whether that makes sense or not. Let's not make an emotional response or listen to some Yahoo online who doesn't actually know how these things work down to their fine details. And let's just come up with a very rational response strategically to making sure you're preserving the most amount of wealth. Because in reality, for anyone listening, the US is talking about making the exact same change. So, a lot of people online are going, we have to get out of Canada. This is ridiculous. Well, where are you going? You're going to the US, and they're looking at proposing the same thing. In fact, the US has some, I would say, fairly beneficial investment tax rates when it comes to real estate, but they've got wealth tax down there. They've got a heavy estate tax that's down there. Their personal tax rates aren't much lower than ours. Their corporate tax rates are a little bit higher than ours. Like, you're not moving there to have a substantial tax savings. So let's make a very emotion removed, very rational decision on what's best on a case by case basis.
For sure. And you see, like Kevin O'Leary was saying, he's like, move out of Canada. I feel like there's a lot of people, not just in terms of like the tax perspective, but just in, like, say in Ontario with the landlord tenant board, right? A lot of people are slowly moving their portfolios outside. With this new tax, when it gets implemented, or even just the way it is, the one thing that, from my understanding, there's a tax benefit to is vendor takebacks. Usually with my clients, what I say to them is say, look, I know there's a tax benefit to it, and then I refer them to an accountant. Can you kind of discuss what maybe a vendor take back is, and then the tax benefits, or especially now with the higher capital gains tax?
Absolutely. And you know what? It's good advice. So good on you for sharing that. I did want to just give a clarification. It is capital gains rate for anything above 250,000. Personally, I thought it was 3 for some reason, but 250,000. So this comes into the capital gains reserve essentially in what we want to do. So this is only for individuals, does not work for corporations, because the corporations do not have that threshold of a reduced tax rate. You can do a capital gains reserve in a corporation, you're just not going to get the benefits. So in this case, we're talking about an individual investor, whether it's in real estate or anything else, where you're buying something and you're selling it for more money. You've entered into an agreement where you're going to sell, let's say, a property and you've got a gain of $1 million. Well, $1 million is more than the threshold of 250,000. So the first 250 is going to be at 25%. The next 750 is going to be at 33%. So what we can do, like you're suggesting, Garrett, is in fact, we take back a vendor take back on that deal. This is specifically just to save tax.
Yep.
Okay. There's a whole lot of other reasons why we as the seller may not want to do that from a risk standpoint.
Agreed.
But we may want to do it because it gets an item off our portfolio as well. So we've got to consider strategy. But if we have that $1 million gain and we take back, let's call it an 80% vendor take back. So we get 20% cash up front, 80% we are loaning them, and we give it to them over a period of 5 years. And the reason I'm using 80% is that there's a formula in the Income Tax Act that allows us to have a maximum amount of capital gains reserve. And it gives us a maximum reserve of 20% per year for a 5 year period, which would get us to that 100%. So with that $1 million gain, if we take that $1 million and we have it taxed over a 5 year period because we didn't get all of the cash up front, we would be able to save 8% tax in that over that period of time. So if we're, looking at this from a tax perspective only, I think that's a really good idea. The other thing, like I mentioned, we've got some strategy that we've got to consider. The other piece would be whether or not you can invest those proceeds, if you got it all now, invest those proceeds and make more than the 8% that you'd be paying in upfront tax. So you want to weigh that as well. Like if it was more than 8% that we'd
Mm-hmm.
be saving, maybe it would be an even stronger advocacy, like
Yep.
as a potential real estate investor, we might be looking at the market right now and saying, you know what, there's a lot of people who've got properties that have heavy accumulated gains right now. And why don't we approach them and get them to do a vendor take back? So we only have to put 20% down, which is a better situation than with most of the other financing we have. And we look at doing a deal that way. Maybe some of the sellers, now that there's the enhanced capital gains tax, would be open to that. So I think there's lots of opportunity to do some more creative things in the space.
Absolutely. And like the thing with that having that property is they know that property. And like you're saying, is can they make 8% somewhere else? Well, they have this property that they're probably just going to sit on that money anyways. So at least they know the deal that they have their money in, right? So
For sure. And it doesn't mean, guys, too, maybe the one part that I left out, doesn't mean that we can't charge interest on that money.
absolutely.
So we might charge 8% interest on that money. No problem. That's what the market is bearing. We're still around that 7% variable borrowing rate. So that's a complete opportunity too. So you save your 8% plus you're making 8% in interest along the way.
Yep.
We could be double ending on that and it ends up being pretty good. Again, secured by property, which I think, how much more security are we going to get in any investment if we can
Absolutely.
have it secured by a property?
Absolutely. Um, with the now with like say with the percent of the capital gains tax stuff like that, does that change the strategy in terms of how soon someone would incorporate, or does it like if they have a strategy in place, does it change the game a little bit? Because obviously, their margins are going to change. How early would you recommend somebody to incorporate it? Because some say incorporate on your first one, some say wait till you have a couple. Where are you at with that? What do you recommend?
Yeah, Garrett, great question. And so I'm going to give you a big old it depends.
Absolutely.
Like most people who are trying to cop out, but I'll give you rationale as to what scenario would apply where.
Fantastic.
I think it's important to understand what your tax rates are before you incorporate this property into anything, right? So we as individuals, we're paying tax on our income. A lot of people who are investing in properties have another business to begin with as well. If you have another business and let's say your personal tax rate, let's say you're taking $100,000, your personal tax rate's around 30%, but you've got a business, your business tax rate is 12.2%, which is great. You should incorporate immediately, right? For a bunch of different reasons. One, the risk related to this investment property, you don't want it impacting your other business. You don't want it impacting you personally. If you've got assets personally, you want to incorporate to limit that risk and that exposure. But it's not necessarily just for the tax rate, right? If you're an
Liability, things like that.
yeah, the other sort of strategic initiatives that we have to be cautious of. If you're an individual who's an employee and you're earning, $100,000 a year, you're paying $30,000 a year. Should you incorporate? I would, but we're not doing it again for the tax related benefits that are in there. Um, if you're, let's go back to the business owner who's got another corporation, 100% you're going to do this. You're going to incorporate it on your first purchase. The reason being is that any of the income that's earned in the corporation, it is taxed as passive investment income and it's taxed at 50%. So, if you think of yourself as an individual, if you're already at 50%, setting up a corporation will protect you. You're not going to save any tax. You're not losing any tax. It probably makes sense to do it. If you've got a business and you're paying 12.2% tax and you're going, well, do I set this corporation up because I know I'm going to be paying 50% tax on this investment income? The answer is yes. The reason is we can actually eliminate that 50% tax by charging management fees over to the corporation. So what we do is we increase the income that's being taxed at 12.2% and we decrease the income that's being taxed at the 50% rate. So what this allows again is us to move and convert not only our personal income, if it was personal, it'd be at 30% plus. Corporate, it would be 50% plus, but we can move it into our 12.2%, which is our other business. So if that's the case, if you're a business owner with another corporation, absolutely buy it within a corporation. You'll save a ton of money. If you're someone who's at a high tax rate, I would do it to protect yourself. And ultimately, I would never really lead an investment opportunity in real estate, predominantly depending on tax savings. I would say, how do we structure this in the best way to create wealth in the long term? The other reason that it would make sense as a business owner for you to incorporate your rental property. So when we're a business owner, we're earning, let's say $100,000 in our business, 12.2%, let's just call it 12. You've got $88,000 of after-tax money that's in this corporation. If you pull that money out, that 88,000 for deposit money to buy a property personally, you're paying dividend tax on that. And you're going to pay another, 30%-ish tax on that. We don't like that. You could, however, take that $88,000 and transfer it from one corporation to another for the down payment money, and you pay zero tax on that transfer. So you get full 88,000 in here in the corporation for a deposit, but personally, you take the 88,000, you pay 30%, you're left with like $55,000 versus $88,000. Your money's going to go a lot farther if it can stay inside the corporate entities. I hope that was clear enough.
Yep.
But it does make sense for the most part to look at incorporating a corporate structure into your real estate acquisitions.
That's fantastic. The last question I have for you, Bob. So
Yeah.
the framework, when I created this, I was thinking as a way to, a lot of people that are thinking thinking to become investing in real estate and, or businesses, etc. So I'm bringing on people who have done, if you had to restart with all the knowledge you have today, all the coaching you've done, and I'm sure it changes for everybody, but what would your framework be to kind of start from the beginning? Say you had no connections, no money, kind of that, like, what is it? The
Yeah,
underground
I was gonna
billionaire
say,
show.
yeah. The one that Grant Cardone was on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So does this have to be specific to real estate or can this be anything?
Anything.
Yeah. See, and I think about this often, right? And I
Mhm.
think, I was telling you right before, I've been fortunate. We've built an 8-figure business that's heading towards 9. We've got 105
Congratulations.
professional employees that are in there. I think about this all the time because I now have all this responsibility with 105 people.
Mhm.
and that's what keeps you up at night to a certain extent. But you always think, if the wind blows out of the wrong direction and you're not prepared for it, what would you do and how would you restart? And yes, this is undercover billionaire all over. With the knowledge that I have, I could restart quick. You know, if I had to do it all over again, I would take all the knowledge in my head and I would charge extraordinarily high fees to teach people what I know. And I would go into coaching and I would work with groups and I would charge them high fees to just get in a room and talk about how I save them and make them a shit pile of money. And so if I had to do that all over, that's what I would do. And then I would probably take that money and reinvest in buying businesses because truthfully, the greatest return you're going to get is investing in a business. So for you business owners that are out there, stop taking the money out. Stop putting it into other weird things. If you want to build your wealth as much as possible and as significantly fast as possible, your return on investment in your business is probably going to be around 20%, between 20 and 30%. We hope, like if it's not there, we got to work with people who can help us get it there. We should be at 20%. Getting a return of 20% is really difficult with many other things. And this is
Absolutely.
something that better than anyone else is your business. And so I would take all of the money that I would earn in charging high fees, sharing how I would save people money, and I would go in and I would start buying businesses. So I would end up back where I am now, probably just as fast. You know what? If I actually collapsed everything right now, started over, I'd probably build it faster than what I'm building it right now, which is pretty weird to say. So I would, again, if I had to start over, I would invest in knowledge. Learn as much as you possibly can. Learn from those people who are achieving things that you want to achieve. Invest yourself in just becoming a sponge and taking it all in. I just signed up. I don't need to take any more courses, but like just yesterday, I signed up at the University of Pennsylvania. They've got a executive education program or mergers and acquisitions, just because I want to learn one thing in that program that's an 8-week program that can make me better at it. Like I'm constantly investing in my knowledge, my network, and connecting with people. So those two things, I think if anybody focuses on that and you be coachable, right?
Mhm.
You know that you don't have all the answers. Like I constantly, even though I'm an expert in areas, I'm constantly learning from people in my space on small iterations that they've had. We're reading tax case studies of what the legislation is interpreting things in one way versus how the legislation says it. So like we're constantly learning, and if you want to become the best version of yourself, you have to invest in yourself, be ready to constantly learn, and find people who've done what you want to do and get yourself surrounded by those people because that's the way that you're going to go all the way to the top.
That's amazing. Bob, I appreciate you coming on. Um, that was a wealth of knowledge. Definitely delivered compared to what we're at the conference. Love to have you back on again, man. If there's anything I can do for you, let me know.
Yeah, awesome, guys. And hopefully, like Garrett and I talked about, 15 minutes hopefully brought a lot of value. Um, we have a lot of free resources on our website and on our social, which is govrocpa.ca for our website and GoVroCPA on any of our socials. Find us, follow us. We're constantly looking at innovating and sharing insights to help people like you and Garrett and his community to make sure that we continue to make a positive change in the world. So pleasure to be here, my friend.
Fantastic. Take care, Bob.